enough?
Yep.
Okay.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the Press Enterprise High School Football Video Podcast. I am Press Enterprise Sports Editor Tim Hare, and we have a very special guest with us this week, an actual broadcaster. We have Jim Doyle of WHLM with us. Jim, thank you very much for being here.
Great to be here.
Now, first of all, I know you pretty much exclusively see Berwick High School football, call them on Friday nights, and I don't know that there are too many people around District 2 who, going into last week's game, would have given Wyoming area much of a chance. What happened?
Well, I found out one thing. Frank Sheptock is a straight shooter. You know, sometimes coaches tend to build up the opposition, but when he talked about Wyoming area the week before that game, it was almost like an admiration for the way they play fundamentally and their toughness and everything. And I thought, well, you know, we'll see. But they lived up to what he thought they were. I don't think Berwick played up to their standards, but still, all the credit has to go to Wyoming area. It was really impressive. I mean, if you went into Crispin Field, didn't know anything about either team, you looked at that game and say, well, it wasn't an upset. The best team on that night won the game. Now, there's a really good chance they'll play again. Will it be different? We'll find out.
Now, just kind of looking at the matchup, it seemed like Wyoming area had a big fullback, and it seemed like they like to do a lot of straight ahead running, which seemed to favor Berwick because they have that big front four, Kyle Pierce and the guys up front. Is that the style that they ran? Was it just kind of straight ahead muscle?
It was a lot of quick hitters. They had some misdirection. They made some great calls on plays when they needed it. But if someone had told me going into that game that the opposition would score on drives of 80 and 95 yards on back-to-back possessions after Berwick had tied the score, I'd say that's just impossible. They looked so dominating the first 2 weeks in those games that I especially against the run, as you mentioned, I didn't think it was possible. But they had, I think, 276 yards rushing, which was amazing.
Yeah, I know. We had one of our writers out at the game, and we were texting ahead of time, and I said, I want to hear all about this dominant Berwick defense. And he texted me at halftime. He's like, when that dominant defense shows up, I'll tell you. I don't think anyone after 2 games where Berwick had shutouts could have seen Wyoming area doing that. Do you, after seeing them lose the way they did to Wyoming area, do you still think this Berwick team is a district title contender?
I do very, very much so. And again, the NFL has, or ESPN, concerning the NFL, has a thing called Overreaction Monday.
Right.
And it is early in the season, and it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see just how good Wyoming area is. They look very, very good at Crispin Field. I mean, they look terrific. And the other thing about their rushing performance, they had probably the smallest offensive line that Berwick will face this season. And when I looked at those weights, I thought 240, their center, John Rubino, was 240 pounds. He was the biggest of all the linemen. They had a tackle 180. I'm thinking, boy, but Frank kept saying, watch this team. They get off the ball, the pad level, coaching stuff. And he thought they were really good, and they were.
Yeah. Now, HLM AM is seeing Central and Loyalsock this week.
Yes.
Central's kind of the surprise team of the Heartland this year. Are you surprised to see that Scott Dennis has the Blue Jays 3-0 at this point?
Well, I guess I am a little bit, but I don't think he is, because when we sat down for lunch in the summer, and he talked about the off season, he talked about the young talent they had. He seemed like a coach that was very, not cocky by any means, but very, very confident that they were going to have a good year. So I don't think this is a surprise to him. They've played some pretty decent teams, and they've won a few. In this modern age, spread offenses and so on, there's still something to be said for you're able to run the ball and stop the run.
Yeah.
That seems like an outdated concept, but it isn't. It's still a success formula. And right now, Central can do that.
Yeah, I know. I got to see them for the first time last week, and I was surprised how they have Isaac Gensimer, who's a sophomore at running back, and they ran to the perimeter a lot, but also, because he's not a big kid, but they run him between the tackles, and it's just like he's coated in Crisco. Like, people just, he's 150 pounds, but people just slide off him. He's a pretty impressive kid.
Yeah, they are the best story locally so far.
Yeah, absolutely. And for them last week, and I don't know how good Tawanda is necessarily, but I know I was looking back to see, I got back to the office after the game and I was like, when's the last time Central either won by 48 points or even scored 48 points in a game? It's kind of nice to see.
It is. And they had young talent a year ago, but it was young. They had ninth graders, including Gensimer, who were starting for them. And so you could see it was coming along. In fact, Scott Dennis said one of the things that attracted him to the job was the roster, the young roster, the young talent that was coming along. That plus the facilities, and so he's loving it.
Oh, I'm sure. Now I'm going to put you on the spot here. Loyal Sock, obviously a pretty good tradition, not just in football, but in just in sports in general. But for Central to beat Loyal Sock, I think would really be a statement. Do you think that they win the game on Friday?
I think so. At this point, I can't pick against them until I see some proof that they've got holes. It'll be tough. Loyal Sock is 2-1. Their loss was a wild one to Mount Carmel in overtime. They run the ball very well. When Marty Clark transferred to Williamsport, I guess those outside the program thought, well, that's going to be a big step back for Loyal Sock, but they still run the ball. I think they're averaging over 300 yards rushing a game. So that stat against Central Columbia's ability so far to stop the run should make it very interesting.
Yeah, I know. I was doing my predictions last night, and I picked Loyal Sock, but in looking at the last 6 years or so, what Bloom is to Central, in that they've beaten them each of the last 10 or 11 years, that's kind of what Central is to Loyal Sock, in that even when Central's down, they play Loyal Sock tough. They beat them in 2011. They were a sub 500 record. They beat them in 2012 when they won the Heartland. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Central improve to 4-0. Now, Southern Columbia, they moved up in our power poll this week to number 1. It had been Berwick, and very young team. Are you surprised at all by how explosive Southern is 1 year after losing 25 seniors and winning a state title?
I think you have to be, even though I had heard from numerous sources that this group of ninth graders is something special. When you look back at the history of Southern Columbia football, particularly the glory years, and there's been a lot of them, impact players as freshmen. You go with Jerry Marks, Rico Rossini, Henry Heinoski, Josh Marks. There's been a handful, but as a group, first of all, they've never had this many ninth graders making an impact and starting and just. In fact, when I talked to Jim Roth earlier this week, he couldn't remember whether he had a freshman with 1,000 yards rushing. He should have remembered that because it was his first year as head coach. Jerry Marks had Jerry Marks had 1,700, but Gage Garcia, I mean, who knows what he's going to have this season if he stays healthy.
Yeah, right now he's their leading rusher, and he's around 450, and he's just a very impressive player. And yet, Julian Fleming at receiver is averaging almost 36 yards a catch. Which, just to say it out loud, I have to laugh.
Yeah.
I know you haven't seen him yet, but maybe at some point in the playoffs. He's just a treat to see.
Yeah, just exceptional athletes, and there's I think there's 6 seniors on the team as opposed to 25 a year ago, which is amazing. I mean, for a normal program, this would have rebuilding all over.
Absolutely.
I've never heard that word said at Southern Columbia. I mean, it's just amazing what they're doing. Now, there's going to be some real tests ahead. I mean, Montoursville will be an extremely tough game. Selinsgrove will be tough. But Danville. But to keep going, and certainly, I don't know if they can win all 3 of those games, but they'll be in them because they have a special group, and they were concerned about inexperience in the front line, but they've got some good young kids there. It's all happening for them, and that, much to the dismay of people on Southern schedule, say, "Well, this would be the year." 25 seniors gone, small school, and they are a small school. I looked at the enrollment figures for District 4 Double A, and they are next to last in enrollment. So it's not a big school.
Now, I know you have a little bit more of a historical perspective, and obviously your broadcast partner, Andy Ulickney, strong ties to Southern. I was looking this week because Southern the past 2 weeks has scored 128 points. And I was curious if they'd ever had consecutive weeks like that in their history. Spoiler alert, they have not. But then I was like, well, they were pretty bad in the late 70s or early 80s. So 128 points the last 2 weeks. From 1979 to 1980, in a 20-game span, they combined for 140 points in 2 years. As someone who's been watching high school football for a long time, could you have ever imagined Southern Columbia's football program getting to a point where they're a 7-time state champion, they're a perennial district champion, Jim Roth, approaching 400 wins? Could you ever imagine a point where Southern was going to be the dominant football program in basically the state?
No, that was inconceivable, especially I taught school at Southern Columbia for 32 years. In the early part of my teaching career, the football program had a 27-game losing streak.
Yeah.
And we had a day off from school after they won a game, not a championship game, a game. When they broke that streak, it was a Thursday night game against Hughesville, and they broke that streak, and we had the next day off from school. It was such a big occasion. At that point, it turned, and Andy Ulickney was the head coach, and they finished that year strong, and then the next year he had a pretty good run there for a 3-year period. But no, he could never have fathomed. Jim Roth right now is 4th in career wins, and if you look at the coaches above him, George Curry, the late George Curry, and Jack Hensies and Jim Render. Hensies and Render are still active, but Jim has something like 36 less losses than George Curry, something like 70 or 80 less losses than Jim Render, and over 100 less losses than Jack Hensies. His record is incredible. I think there's been one season out of 33 where his teams had less than 9 wins. I mean, it's an 11-game schedule. That's
Yeah, I made the point last night to my assistant Dan Riley, because I think Jim Roth now like 385, 82-2, something in that neighborhood. So when you think that if he wanted to coach for the next 30 years and just forfeit those games, just lose your next 30 years worth of games and still be above 500, that's a pretty good resume.
Yeah, it's amazing. Actually, the only time I felt sorry for Jim is when they had that string of losing in the state finals, and it was amazing to hear people and the media criticize. Well, he has to change this, he has to change that. Boy, most coaches, he said, you won't have success in the state final, but you'll get there every year. They'd sign up in a heartbeat.
Well, when you think about his second worst season is like a 9-5 season. Some coaches coach 10, 12 years, and that's like hang a banner on the wall in the gym. That's your best year. Now, I know this is a high school football video podcast, but I am a BU graduate. I've been listening to the games so far this year, and 2-0, and it's early, but I'm just curious. It's a program that has traditionally had a lot of success in the last 20 years. Is this a BU team that is the typical at least 7-win team, or do you think this is a BU team that is capable of more, 9, 10 wins?
Well, again, we're early, but I'm starting to like a lot of what I see, and I think they might be capable of another special season. They didn't get a lot of respect in the preseason polls, picked 3rd behind Westchester and Shippensburg, and we'll see how that plays out. But Chris Polubinski was taken over at quarterback, and Tim Kelly had a great career, 37-10 as a starter, all-time leading passer in yardage. But Chris has a real presence, has real command.
audibled on the first play.
Yeah,
of his
how about
career as a
that?
starter. That's confidence.
Yeah, yeah.